Welcome back to Cross Politic.
This is good.
Chocolate Knox is still drinking the green juice.
It's good, man. It's good. I don't care what you say.
No, it's not good.
Man.
Dr. Stokes was about to, he was leading up to this truth bomb he was going to drop on us. Right?
Wow, that's like really setting me up for a fall.
That's
gonna be really
We do
disappointing.
our best.
Downhill
We
from
do
here.
our best. Gabe, what was your question again?
Yeah, so it seems like because the church has I think lost some overall leadership with all these denominations and things popping up, that it's given rise to other philosophies gaining in popularity, but also kind of formulating themselves a little better, like atheism. I feel like atheism in the last century or so has kind of formulated their position a lot better over the years, because the church hasn't probably responded like they should have with a unified voice and all this.
Yeah, that's good. I'm not sure so much about that. I mean, I think that's certainly part of it, and it's certainly one of the arguments against the truth of Christianity. And it's like, come on, that's just your interpretation. You can use the Bible to say anything. So, and so I do think that there's a contributor there to that. It'd be interesting to see
the failure of the church to speak with a unified authoritative voice. Going back to the authority thing, maybe a little bit. So who's to say? Yeah. So there's no God.
And I think part of that is not just the authority. It's they think that the lack of authority also means, and the lack of consensus means, that there's a lack of truth. So it undermines all kinds of stuff. So I think a lot. Anyways, I think over the last probably 150 years or so, the big problem. I mean, you could probably even push it back, but I think the biggest motivator for unbelief is science. I mean, how about this? Obviously, sin's a big motivator for unbelief, but in terms of some of the arguments garnered for atheism, science has been, and which is why I start out with in this book the how to be an atheist. As far as the title's concerned, it's basically my inner atheism being able to speak, my inner atheists, because I just have a skeptical nature, and I've always wondered why atheists aren't
as skeptical.
Yeah, I mean, like, just come on, man. If I were an atheist, even
You'd
as a
be skeptical
Christian,
about everything.
Even as a Christian, I'm skeptical about things that I ought not to be skeptical about, and things that I ought. So I'm just wondering why
Christ
there isn't. Thank you. Oh man, I need all that I can get, baby.
Well, and you're like, the first chapter in your book, you really hammer on that.
Yeah.
Like we're all skeptics, in some sense, and we're all and in some sense, it's good. There's good skepticism, and then there's unbelieving skepticism.
Right.
Like, you always get in the discussion with your unbelieving friend, and he keeps asking the question, well, why? Or how do you know? And that comes up. He says, how do you know? And I'm like, those are good questions, as long as you really want an answer.
Right.
Oftentimes, skepticism gets thrown up there because they don't want an answer. They just want to be a skeptic and push away.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times that, and I don't think, like you said, I mean, I think this is great where if you're talking with someone and it's this relational, you're one-on-one and you're saying, hey, yeah, that's a good question. I think we need to be able to acknowledge that. If we just go, we're always just kind of laughing at them, say, come on, man, that you just don't want to believe that, because you just want to be able to do what you want to do.
Yeah.
And I do think, I mean, not that there's never a place for that, because after knowing a person for a while, you are going to realize, you're not looking for an answer, are you?
Right. The Psalm says, the fool says in his heart, there's no God. Right.
So we know what's going on.
So, the guy who says there is no God really is a fool.
And those beatings for the backs of them fools, right? So,
and this is the thing.
Loosely translated,
spoken like a true black man.
Loosely translated, of course.
And I think that's an important point, because I think that everyone has some fool in their own heart.
Watch it now.
Watch
it now.
Turn it on, Toby. So Mitch, I'm taking it that you would not like most of the presuppositional apologetic response in discussion.
I don't know. It depends.
You hate presup. No, I'm just kidding.
No, you didn't. Don't hurt.
Some of my best friends are presup.
But you also know karate.
Why are you looking at me like that?
Because you're a great friend of mine.
You were finishing something. Yeah, you interrupted it.
I took him away from his thought. Probably.
I'm easily distracted. Easily distracted. I think that the
fool says in his heart. And we're all fools.
And a lot of times in the apologetics that I do, oftentimes have some of the questions that I'm answering have been generated by me, not just by other people. Yeah. So oftentimes if I'm teaching or if I'm writing or something like that, it's many times, if not always, to some degree, to myself. And I think that being able to understand where they're coming from, and I think being able to hopefully communicate that, particularly when it comes to just, we've done this with friends one-on-one, or people, and I think being able to communicate that is so important. Yeah. Because then
one time I thought it would be a good idea to call Mitch in to help me with a friend of mine that I met at the university, and it was hilarious. Oh, it was hilarious. I mean, there was an online thing, and it kind of blew up, and then we went out and got beers, and it was a lot better. But it was hilarious.
Yeah, and it was, and that was a turning point. I learned a lot through that. Just that, not that I didn't know it before, but it certainly hammered the point home that relational one-on-one, that's really, really important sometimes, for certain things. And if I'm going to be talking with just someone one-on-one, it's much better to be face-to-face, and being able to communicate hey, I understand what you're, I understand, but and don't forget you don't want to just be like, oh yeah, you're right.
Right.
You want to be able to say, no, that makes sense. But what about this?
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard for me to give that much ground to, at least most atheists that I talk to. It's probably because of the atmosphere that we're in.
Yeah.
So if when I'm going out in the street and I'm witnessing to someone and there's a crowd, usually the environment is set up that the guy who won the argument, right? So the worldviews are set up one on each side, and everybody's watching to see which worldview. So when you go to debates, that's the reason you're going to a debate.
Because you want a winner.
Because you want to see the other worldview destroyed in such a way where it's like, oh, this is true, right? This is the big Elijah fight with the prophets of Baal kind of thing.
But I don't think that has to be opposed to winning the person.
No. That's what exactly I was about to say. But in the atmosphere, because of the environment, sometimes you have to do both. And usually the second one winning the person is kind of like, hey, man, look, I know everybody's celebrating right now, but dude, I really love you, man. I really care about you. You know what I'm saying? But
I might have told this story before on here, but there was this one guy that when I was out preaching at campus a couple years ago, probably the first time I went out there, and he came right up in my face and started cussing me out as I was like literally just started. I didn't even, get into like more than I'm here to talk to you about Jesus. And it was
that was enough.
Just boom. Yeah. And I'm like, whoa. And so I'm starting to like, what's your deal? What's going on? And crowd forms. We're arguing. He goes off in a huff.
You pay him his $20. Thanks for the crowd.
I was thanking the Lord for it. Because it was this opportunity, and I ended up talking to a number of other people after he goes off in a huff. Well, he keeps showing up over the semester that fall, and he would come up, pot shots. Sometimes he'd just walk by and just, lob something at me, walk off, keep going, give me the finger, whatever. But towards the end of the semester, this hilarious thing happened where another kid comes out of the crowd and starts hollering at, actually, it was me. And this time, Pastor Wilson came out with me, and this kid just starts chewing out Doug.
Oh, wow.
And he's this little punk kid and just like completely disrespectful. Like the other guy was mad, but he was kind of like, he was a philosopher and he was mad. Like he was really mad, but he was a philosopher. And so he's like, at least you were arguing, but he was just mad at you. This kid is just completely disrespectful. He was just like, the equivalent of spitting in your face kind of stuff. And this other guy shows up and starts arguing too. And at the end of the conversation, there's this big crowd. It was probably one of the biggest crowd we've ever had. Like we probably a couple hundred people.
Wow.
Listening to this back and forth. What do Christians believe? But what about this? What about that? And we're presenting the gospel. And then after the crowd goes away, that guy that had originally come up to me the very first time, cussing me out, comes up to me and says, hey man, I'm really sorry about that other kid.
Right.
And we're like,
you trained him, right?
No. That's fine. And I had been trying to get his name for months, and he wouldn't give me his name. I reached out and said, "Hey, I'm Toby," and he gave me his name. I said, "Hey, would you go out to lunch with me?" And he said, "Sure."
Nice.
And we went out to lunch together.
Wow.
You know, but so I mean, it's
right.
And I think too sometimes we're not patient enough because sometimes we think if there's a fight, it's bad.
Right.
But I honestly think
that depends on who you are. You know?
If it's a fight, it's good.
Except for you, Chuck. But I think there's this sense of like, I know there's people that are belligerent and they just want to fight to fight, and I that's that. Maybe these really really tight shoed Reformed Baptist people you're talking about or whatever. I don't know, but like I think you get into a more Reformed orbit and maybe you kind of mellow out a little bit, and you're like, but we can get along, we can have disagreements and so on, and I think every collision then after that or friction can feel like, oh no, I'm going back to that world. I'm going back to that belligerent world rather than recognizing, no, this is just truth colliding with other things. And you can keep loving people even in the midst of the conflict, even in the midst of the disagreement. And like in this extreme situation where, I was getting cussed out and and 3 months, you wouldn't have taken a snapshot of that and said 3 months later, they'll be having lunch together.
And he'll be defending you. Against another cusser.
Right. And he didn't convert. Yeah. He didn't. As far as I know, he's still an atheist.
Yeah.
But we had lunch together. We got coffee at Bootzer's a couple times. We were cordial. I've seen him around town since and waved.
Well, let's get back to Mitch's book here.
I was going to say, let's just assume for a second that we have maybe 15 atheists listening to this podcast. That's kind of funny. But let's just assume we do for a second, and they're listening because we told them that we're going to teach them how to be a good atheist.
And we have Christians, though, who have inner atheists.
Sure.
Well, that's Mitch's,
skeptics, right?
Yeah.
So we're inner fools. We have inner skepticism.
Yeah. So what do you say, Mitch? What do you tell them?
Well, it kind of starts out, well, look, I think skepticism is great. I think you need to have a kind of skepticism, but you can't have an uber skepticism where nothing gets through, and you can't have an uber
nothing ever gets settled.
Yeah, that too.
Right.
An uber credulity where you just believe any old thing. And so again, like most things, there's this middle road, and it's often this is the place where it's hardest to navigate to stay on the road. But anyways, all of that to say, look, the skepticism itself isn't bad. And so let's do that, and let's look. And so in the book, I say, let's see what this looks like. And so I start looking at some of and as I was saying before, science is a big reason that people aren't believers, or at least that's what they say. Yeah. So that's enormous. And so I say, all right, well, let's look at how we form beliefs. Go through all that, and then let's look at scientific theories. Let's look at how they're formed. Let's look at what goes into forming a scientific theory. And I show, and none of it's science bashing. I'm enthusiastic, very enthusiastic.
You're a scientist.
About science. Yeah. I'm 2 thumbs up for science.
For everyone who can't see him right now, he just did
one. He did one first. When he
said two second one.
Yeah, the second one just for these guys. Yeah, and can everyone see what I'm doing?
We're all getting punched after this. We're all getting punched after this. That's it.
So let's see what that looks like. Let's look at science not from a science bashing standpoint. Like, I don't even go into old earth, young, none of that. I'm just looking at scientific theories in general, and then start looking at the theories in physics, and what can we know, what can't we know, and it just shows if you're going to be skeptic when it comes to things that science hasn't observed, which is far more than we realize, then you'll probably hold your horses on a lot of those things. Yeah. But even so, you just need to know that there are things that we haven't observed, and sometimes you get to the current physics where they're just not sure about what the fundamental nature of reality is, and it's like, hey, fine, we've done great in physics in the past. We might be on the right path, but then don't say that science has shown that God doesn't exist if it's still if it's not saying everything, if it's not certain about this one area, then why think it's, talk about unobservable. Right. God is like one of them. If you're kind of like, I don't know, there might be strings, there might not be, that might be the fundamental nature of reality, strings or quarks or whatever. Quarks made up of strings. I don't know. But if you're gonna,
right,
can you really say, okay, well, there's
no God.
So, anyways, a lot of it just has to do. It's not. I'm not saying that in the book. I don't argue that there's no God. I mean that there's a God. I just argue. Look, that starting
not enough
with
evidence
science,
for that.
It's like, come on. I think your arguments are a little too strong. And then the second part, I say, okay, suppose science does say that there's no God. I'll just give it to you. You know, I think we've shown that it doesn't. So, but let's just say it. What would that look like when it comes to morality? And then I take the last part.
Smack them right there in the face. Just straight smack them and say, if that premise is correct, you shouldn't be angry with me right now. Right? Because there's nothing been done wrong to you at that point.
And that's there's a sense in which you can't say that that's wrong. I mean, you can be angry. Anger is just a feeling. Like, hey, totally. But there's.
Why would you be angry?
Well, just because it's a feeling.
Because you're fizzing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just
you're fizzing.
Yeah, right. It's a chemical
fizzing differently.
response.
Yeah.
It's a chemical.
Okay,
response.
But not upset.
I don't know. I think that's a chemical response too.
Right.
A lot of times.
So then nothing really happened.
Well. Here's and this is the thing. If you really are going to take, in the arguments, a little more complex than this, but you really just can't get value out of immaterial stuff. You know, an ethical value, like this is right, this is wrong, you know, this is good, this is bad.
Right.
Those are values.
Right. Yeah. You can't get that
and so you
out
can't,
of pure materialism.
Right.
Right.
And in fact, and I go further and I say that there is no objective, get this, there is no objective right or wrong. It's all subjective. You need a valuer in order to have value.
Right.
And if there's no God, then the only value is human valuers, maybe some animals, depending on how advanced they are. But if there's a God, there's a human independent valuer.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but anyways, I do say all values subjective, and I do that on purpose, and I have some reasons for doing that because I think that we give too much if we try to make this universe impersonal. We give up too much. It's a relational, personal universe made by a personal God.
Mm.
So objective truth, morality, right, wrong, and so on is directly connected to the personal God. And if there is not a personal God, then you don't have any of that.
Yeah, well, the truth one is a little more difficult. I don't say that in the book. There may be an argument towards that.
Primarily values.
But I do say value. Yeah, and I think there is a sense in which there's truth is the measure of truth is a standard, and therefore there's some value. But I'm mostly focusing on ethical value or the meaning of life.
But when those things have to be true?
Yeah, the statements about them
have to be
no
true.
doubt.
So
yeah.
then true itself would be.
That's a real Van Tillian move of you.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well, no, I
that's a real precept right there.
But just so you know, it's also a real Plantingian move. I mean, this is just and I'll throw this out. Here's my view. Can I say something about presupposition?
Do it. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Carefully.
I know.
Absolutely.
I will.
I set you up.
Don't hurt Gabriel's feelings.
I'll be really careful.
I mean, move my mic out the way so I can lunch off the table.
Yeah, no, presuppositionalism is great.
Amen.
Did you hear that?
Amen.
That sounds like a Paul move.
I think, but here's my, I think where it's good, it's not unique. It's not. I mean, I see all of the positive things that presuppositionalists have pushed, like no neutrality and a need for epistemic authority. All of that is thumbs up, but that's not unique to presuppositionalism. And then there are some things that tend to be unique, at least on some readings of presuppositionalism. I heard that.
Oh, it's on the mic.
It's on the mic.
Oh yeah. They know I vape.
Okay, all right.
That's why I'm doing it not to talk. I'm just vaping.
Dude, that's good.
It's all smoky in here. I feel really guilty. This is taking me back way too far.
What was the other thing you were going to say about precept, though?
What was I going to say? Dude, I don't know anymore.
One is not
it's all
unique.
really just...
are you thinking of things like, apart from God, you can't know that you exist?
Right.
Or that you can't know that New York City exists?
Yeah, there are a number of things. So, unbelievers don't have knowledge. I would say that's taken neat. That's palpably false. I think there's some truth to it, and then where presuppositionalism is right about that, it's not unique anymore. I mean, everyone knows.
Or if they say, well, what I mean by that is you don't have a consistent way of accounting for New York City, your knowledge of New York City.
Yeah, just exactly. Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, that's fair enough, but that's not unique to presuppositionalism. Okay. So that's where I tend to be on presuppositionalism. So it's not so much that I disagree. It's usually when you push on it and there's a qualification, nuance. If there's a if there's a qualification, then it usually comes out that, oh yeah, no, that totally makes sense. But that's certainly not unique to presuppositionalism. So I think maybe a big part of the problem is in how some of the people who follow presuppositionalists make it hey, I'm a presuppositionalist, and they think that it's a unique apologetic method. So, for example, you take someone like Doug Wilson. I mean, he's a presuppositionalist.
Yeah.
But I use his books on apologetics all the time because and it's just good apologetics. It's not unique to presuppositionalism. Mm-hmm. So
I think just to kind of push back on that, I think some of the way that the argument is had is what's unique by how they hold that position. So, for me, if I'm having a conversation with someone, I'm not usually arguing with them about the issue of science because I don't feel like we have a ground on which to have this conversation if you don't believe in truth. Right?
Well, but they do. But I think that's, and again, I think that's, and this is one of the things I think is wrong about presuppositionalism is that they sometimes overestimate the antithesis in the sense that they think that humans who have been made in God's image and have just don't get it. They just can't get anything. But I do think that there are certain truths that you do have common ground that you can get traction with.
Well, hold on. I think the position is that it's not when you're talking to someone and they say, well, there's no such thing as truth. Well, you're not saying that that person doesn't know truth or can't understand truth. You're saying that you're completely made in the image of God. You're made to handle truth, to know and understand truth, and you're suppressing it.
Yeah, I was going to say,
by comments like that.
Isn't Romans 1, kind of the go-to verse, for a lot of presuppositionalists is that, what can be known about God is known, but they're suppressing the truth in unrighteousness.
Right. But arguing, so the person says there's no truth. Well, there are all kinds, that's been argued against.
How do you deal with something like that?
Well, first of all, let me finish. There's been all kinds of arguments since Plato when it comes to relativism about truth. That just tends to be self-defeating. So
I don't read Plato. I'm not that intelligent.
well, wait. No. This is
David's
just something.
Sorry, I'm not on the doctor level yet.
No. You don't need it. You don't need to be. Today when someone says there's no truth, oftentimes they're not going to say it flat-footedly like that.
Well,
that's going to be now. And if they do say, well, is that true? That's just the standard view. And so it's not necessarily unique to presuppositionalism to argue for absolute truth either. So I think, and it's not unique to presuppositionalism to take Romans 1 seriously either. So anyways, I guess maybe the thing is just to make presuppositionalism an issue of, important disagreement. It can be an issue of disagreement, but it's probably not as important as a lot of presuppositionalists make it out to be.
Right. Yeah, I can see some of them make it more than it needs to be. I just find it that the argumentation of presuppositionalism, I see a lot of the people who are not presuppers use presuppositional apologetics because that's just there's no such thing as truth. You want me to believe that?
Or that just might mean that there's presuppositionalism isn't unique.
Do you think
you're just calling any good argument presuppositionalism?
Yeah.
What about this?
Certainly, because presupposition, no one's going to deny that we need presuppositions. No one's going to deny that background beliefs.
But then they don't argue according to those.
Well, I think many people do.
Well, you just said that you in your book that you didn't argue for God. Right. So then you weren't arguing for the presupposition of an existence of God then.
Right. Not then I wasn't. There are different contexts in which I'm going to argue different.
I would say, why would you do that though?
Do what?
Argue for a non-God or no God.
No, I wasn't arguing for no.
Oh, you said God. You weren't using.
No, I said my argument was such that I didn't take it any further to argue, okay, because science, I didn't make this argument, because science is uncertain about certain things, or about some things, that there's a God.
Right.
So that's the argument. But some Christians will say that. They'll make the argument where, look, science can't tell us the truth. And then they'll go on to say that therefore there's God, or I just don't go there.
But why not make the argument that you can't do science without God?
Well, I think you can. That's just not what I do in the book. I mean, you can. There's only so much time in a day.
Why didn't you write all of the books we wanted you to write?
Yeah, exactly. We wanted you to write the book we wanted you to write.
I know. I keep asking myself.
Where do we get your book at?
Is it
Amazon?
Amazon.com.
Yeah, that's
How to Be an Atheist?
How to Be an Atheist. Why Many Skeptics Aren't Skeptical Enough. By Dr. Mitch Stokes.
Yeah.
And we're going to keep fighting after this. But
thanks for being on the show.
Yeah,
thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Until next week, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, be a presuppositionalist, and feast.